So I'll get started. Again, thank you very much for participating in this session. This is the Advancing the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Journey Through Evaluation. And again, I ask each of you to please, introduce yourself in the chat with your name, title, and if you can stay on mute, just for now. We'll have a very dynamic opportunity for you to ask questions and be involved as well. So I'm Bobby Jefferson. I'm SID Washington board member and chair of the DEI committee at SID. I am so honored. I'm completely honored to introduce the facilitator, John Walton, and from Reos Partners. John is a multicultural leader and a team expert in DEI, and we'll put his bio in the chat so that you can read about it. In the last year, SID has supported conversations on DEI, and I've been very fortunate to have John facilitate those conversations, those discussions, because many organizations are now establishing themselves with DEI initiatives and surveys and baselines and affiliate groups and putting together a metric. So many of us have seen surveys and data that's been associated with diversity, equity, inclusion. And so what we'll invite you to experience with John is an interactive conversation about what we've learned over the last year and how to advance these efforts and continue to measure. Because how to apply them internally and monitoring the data that's associated is hugely important. So I turn the session over to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. And I will say that it's good to be here again. I think it was here last year and we had a really good session. So I've been looking forward to this one as well. So I guess thanks to Bobby and Julie for sure. And I think what I'd like to do would be to maybe see if we can start off with a couple polling questions to kind of get us going and while people still are rolling in. So Laxmi, can you help us out with that? There we go. So if you would, go ahead and take a look at a couple polling questions we have there. Wow. I love doing these polls because every time I learn something new or I see something that's always really super interesting to me. So let's see here. Yeah, so it looks like there's really pretty good awareness. Oh, wow, look at this. This is changing so rapidly. Yeah, so on the awareness, we've got maybe 50% of folks that are saying that they were very aware before 2020. And then I think over the last year, it seems really interesting that obviously the vast majority of you have also experienced or seen an increase in the number of programs or programming that's been offered. And let's see here. Yeah, and overall awareness is really, really strong too. So this looks like this is going to be a really interesting group to have this conversation with. All right, I think we've got probably everyone in, it looks like. Okay, well, let's go ahead and I'm going to get going, but I really find some of these questions and answers intriguing just because they really can start to tell us a lot about what's going on kind of in the DEI space. And I'm going to share these results. Laxmi, I'm sorry, I'm probably doing your work for you. Has everyone got that? I'm going to assume that's a yes. I'm kind of not seeing much of anything here on my end. So I guess let's go ahead and get started. One of the things that I really want to do is I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. And somehow we've moved along. So let's back up a little bit real quick. So today's conversation is really about advancing the DEI journey through evaluation. And I think when Julie kind of approached me about this, I think one of my considerations was, given this crowd and given, the fact that I've done a little bit of work in the international development space and all of that, my biggest concern, quite honestly, was, hey, there's a bunch of people in this space that are going to be M&E, or monitoring evaluation experts. And I'm not. And so I'm probably going to rely on some of the folks that really are super, super experts. I think that for me and my role in this is to really open up, hopefully, some eyes to what's possible. And in terms of what kind of ideas and what kind of things you might be thinking about. And the reason I say that, I guess, is because this work is so important that I think that there's not always one person or one organization, whether it's HR or kind of your, racial justice group or whatever may have formed in the last year, that should be in charge of this. I think that there's a lot of work and support that we can all do in this process. So that's really what I'm going to kind of try to focus on today. I know Bobby gave me a nice little intro, so I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to assume that you can take a look at the bio that's in the chat there somewhere and take a look. And just say that, I've been doing DEI work for a number of years now. I kind of came into it through the kind of multicultural, cultural competency realm as I was starting to do a lot of international projects. And so now my work with Reos partners is really focused on the facilitation of a lot of these challenging conversations. So we're really a social enterprise organization that helps organizations tackle really tough, challenging situations that are often seen as being intractable or without resolution. So we do that work. You can check us out and learn a little bit more about what we do. And I'm just going to keep on rolling on here. So today's conversation is really going to touch on kind of 3 or 4 big areas. One is I want to talk about, where are we? Where are we today? Kind of what have we learned over this time, thinking about the polling questions that were posed a minute ago. And then we'll go in and we'll move in and we'll talk about status quo, right? And so what does the status quo look like for your organization or for whatever group you're interested in? And then we'll spend a good amount of time on evaluation themes, just some themes and ideas around how you might want to approach your evaluation, or at least to be thinking about evaluation strategies. And then a little bit on goals and strategies, how you make sure that you kind of align the evaluations with your goals and strategies for your programs. And then lastly, we'll talk about results. And my plan is to leave a good amount of time for us to have some engagement and some questions, hopefully some answers. I'm going to hope that we've got a few of our experts in the space too that can support us as we have this conversation. And then the last bit, and I think I have Julie or someone else, maybe Melina or someone, is helping monitor the chat. So if you've got some questions, drop them in the chat. I'm certainly open to kind of answering them on the fly if I can get to them. So if you want, feel free to kind of pop in, or Julie or somebody, just let me know and we'll take a break there. If not, certainly you can hold them till the end and we'll do that. Okay.
Hi, John. This is Julie. Yes, please go ahead and add your questions to the chat box. But also, John, I just wanted to let you know that could you change your presentation to presenting mode as a slideshow? Sorry to interrupt.
Let's try again.
So if you could turn it to, we see all your notes, which is okay.
Oh, well, you probably want to try that.
Okay.
So give me 1 second here then. Julie, I thought we tried that on the tester and I was good.
So if you just share your screen and just.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure I've got the right screens lined up for you.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Is that better now?
Perfect.
Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you, Julie. All right. So kind of this where we are, and I think that probably it looked like from the survey that a lot of people are pretty up to speed on what's been going on kind of in the DEI, racial, social justice space. And with kind of the 1 year anniversary of George Floyd's murder yesterday, it just felt really important to kind of stop and have this conversation, and to put it in perspective here around what's happened lately. There, as you can see here, I'm not going to read that quote, but I'm going to guess that many of your organizations have made similar commitments, right, where they've pledged a lot of money, a lot of resources or effort to addressing some of the challenges within your own organizations and within society as a whole. And what I find to be really interesting and telling is this idea that, you know, if you look at $50 billion having been pledged toward racial equity, and that so far they've only spent or even allocated 250 million, you know, what is that, a half of a percentage? Yeah, so it just doesn't really quite line up. And so that's one of the things that I really would like to get into today as well, is understanding about what the resources are that we have available and what some of the commitments have meant for us, and as well as some of the gaps that we have kind of coming out of this, because you've had a year to look at these challenges. And so now it becomes a question of, how do we move forward? How do we take what we have learned over this last year and start to apply it to the challenges that are in front of us, okay? And so one of the questions I guess I ask is, you know, what has your organization been doing to advance DEI? What's worked for you? What hasn't worked? Right, and so if you look here, here's just kind of this generic list of the challenges I think that are coming on the back end of that. You know, this one about money and funding, I think that we can probably say that it's been debunked. I think that slide a minute ago probably proves that to some degree, but I do want to recognize that there are some organizations, though, that don't have the funding. And, you know, I've worked with a few of them that have been really budget constrained, but they've still been able to do this work, right? So they're still able to roll out programs. They're still able to support it in some way. And so if you've got an organization, you know, if you work for one or a nonprofit and you just don't have a lot of funds, hopefully today you're going to see and learn of a few ways and tricks that you might be able to do some evaluation work without a big budget. One of the other challenges I think that everyone knows about, right, is just the politics. And I mean, you know, last year, and, you know, I think it actually, maybe it was for this conference. I can't remember if it was this conference or another one that I spoke at, but the president, when President Trump was in, he had an executive order that basically put a big quash on people's ability to talk about diversity and inclusion topics. And so you talk about politics, there's, you know, that level, but there's also internal politics, right, that you need to be aware of and know how far you can kind of push the ball, if you will, up the hill. So think about the politics. I think also looking at policies, I have a lot of conversation with organizations that that don't necessarily think about their policies and the way that they influence outcomes in some of their programming. And so I just want to say that policies are often a challenge. We have policies that have been sitting on our desk or in some folder for 20, 30 years in an organization and haven't been updated. That's one really effective way to start making impact. Biases, hopefully everyone, based on the study, you know about biases, because I'm going to guess everyone's had probably some sort of unconscious, conscious bias training over the last 12 to 15 months. The other piece that's important to think about too is just leadership and readiness, right? And so we really have to think of ourselves as leaders, as well as leaders above us and below us, and what their ability is to kind of take on this work. It's really challenging work. And to be honest, there are some leaders that aren't necessarily up for the challenge. And the work is to how do you get them up to speed or engage them in a way so that they can kind of come along with you in this work. And first barriers, when I talk about first barriers in terms of DEI programs, it's like that first mover thing almost, which is, you know, are you going to be the first woman in X job? Am I going to be the first Black male in X position? And the pressure that goes along with that. And then when those folks, leave or move on, there's always these challenges of who's going to be the next first, or how does that look? So one last challenge, I guess, that I really want to emphasize, because in the last, I guess I'm going to say 6 months in my mind, a lot of the people, practitioners, DEI practitioners in my network have gone away. They have either gotten out of the practice or else they've gone and taken internal roles. And so I guess I say that you need to have skilled and willing practitioners to do this work. And that is getting to be more of a challenge these days. It's just harder to find folks that can do this work. So one of the first things when I start thinking and talking about readiness, like, are you ready to embark on this kind of evaluation program? It's really about how you're going to take that first step towards being a more inclusive and equitable organization, right? And you need to understand what your status quo is so that you can understand where you're starting from, right? So you can't figure out kind of how to get to the end goal without knowing where you're starting from. And that's the whole idea there, right? And so if you can kind of do this baseline and understand what the status quo is, you're in a much better position to build out your programs. And so I think that, when we think about improving over time, and especially DEI work, you really have to take a long-term approach to this, right? Sit back, think about how you want to make progress and what big progress and what little progress looks like within these programs, and then figure out how you're going to measure, right? And so the other piece of this too is that I've seen a few organizations that want to go and do kind of this baselining, or as I'm calling it, status quo, on their own, and just kind of go, oh, I think I know what type of team we have here. And I'm going to caution you against that, and I caution you against skipping this first step, because it really impedes your ability to get a broad understanding. I don't know where my own blind spots are. And so that's one of the challenges. And then when you start thinking about solutioning, you really want to have the people who you're trying to support involved in those conversations. You want to make sure that you've got an accurate baseline to base things off of. So while it's kind of easy to race ahead towards solutions, you're not going to get very far unless you know where you're starting from. So start with those demographic dimension data, right? And so that's this kind of the core stuff around race, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability status, because those are some core stats that you can then use, as we'll learn in a little bit here, to segregate, to further define and partition your data to get a little bit better understanding on it. One thing I will say is you may also want to include, in addition to diversity dimension data, something, and especially, I guess I say this specifically towards those of you that are doing international development and do a lot of international work, where you may want to include some questions to folks around, right, their cultural background, the languages they speak, maybe even on their, foreign experience or, overseas experience, because I think that's going to also help you to understand where the strengths and challenges are within your own organization. And so, the goal behind this initial baseline is really to measure sentiments, right? We really want to understand how people feel today about diversity, inclusion, equality, and all of those topics as a baseline now, so that as we start to define specific goals for our programs, we know where we're going to. And I think that it's really important to also, and we'll talk about this, to make sure you're including these open-ended questions, because I use a lot of interviews in my work, especially DEI work, because people always have a lot to share in this space. And I found that giving them, whether it's an open text box or 15 or 45 minutes with me, is absolutely revealing in terms of what we learn. So I'm going to encourage you to do that and include that in your monitoring and your evaluation work, because it's really important to think about those things. The last thing, and I mentioned it before, but I'm probably going to talk about this a lot, is to think about who's doing the work, right? And so when you're setting up these programs and you're starting to think about how evaluation might look for your team or your organization, think about who's doing the work. Last year, when a lot of this, kind of racial and social justice awareness kicked off, what we saw were a lot of people of color that were pulled into, whether they were interested, a lot of us maybe were naturally interested in it, some of us were pulled in, but what's their capacity, right? Who's doing the work? Who is managing the survey? Who's assessing? Who are you asking to be on your committees? Because I think at this point, we've got to think about burnout for some folks, right? The emotional tax is so high that I think that it's natural that, for people to maybe last a year and then they need to move on or to move out of that work and get back kind of into their natural professional path. So think about who's doing the work as you start to prepare for these evaluations. All right. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about themes here and get into some of the questions. And I guess I'll pause here and see, Julie, if there was anything else in the chat I need to look at.
There isn't a question per se. I mean, Bobby did post something to the group to ask people to share their experience or any positive experiences with DEI surveys. So that's what has been put in the chat. But if there's anything you want to share more about any DEI surveys out there, we can do that.
Yeah, and I guess I'll say that I guess I was going to get to that a little bit later in the presentation, but please, if you have good resources for surveys and questions, put them in the chat. There are so many surveys that are out there. Like, I say borrow, don't reinvent. There's been a lot of work that has gone in and people have put a lot of effort into creating some surveys. And so I would say steal them, borrow them, because that's a really good way. And so if you've got some, drop them in the chat and I'll see if I can add some in too at the end here as we wrap up today. But thinking about this in themes, I think is really helpful, especially if you're not kind of an M&E practitioner and you don't do this a lot, or you're not like a DEI core person. And that's kind of the way I guess I built this deck for today, or this conversation was based on, hey, we're not all probably experts in the evaluation side of things. So let's think about what I could do with my little team or with my small organization, as well as this obviously applies to a larger scale organization or team, if you want to look at it that way. So easy to think about it in a couple different buckets in my mind. And so you can take this is the easy way in my mind. So think about it as diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And then what questions could you ask around those? And there's plenty of examples out there. I'm just going to encourage you to keep it easy and use like a 5-point Likert scale or something, from strongly disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree, to judge. It makes it easy for people. It's really easy to quantify and kind of manage the survey in that way. And then I would say, also use the diversity dimensions, right? Race, gender, to help you kind of disaggregate the data once you get it in. And so on the diversity side, this first question, are there role models that you can relate to? This is really a good question to ask because you can then start to aggregate the data and look at it by gender, age, sexual orientation, so that you can really start to understand where some of the gaps are potentially within the organization. The questions around, does your company value diversity and does your team value diversity? I think it's good to kind of have both of those in there because there can be pretty significant differences within a team in terms of perceptions around diversity or equality or inclusion versus what the corporate or the organizational perspective is. So I really like to make sure that you include kind of a couple different levels of an organization within the questions, because you really can get some insights into which groups or leaders or business units might be having challenges and which ones are doing well. And that way, you know where to go and steal and borrow and learn from each other. And then this last one around diversity and leadership, I think is really important. I don't know that I need to say this, but it all starts from the top. And so, your program will be challenged if you don't have strong leadership support. And so questions around leadership are really valuable to you as a program administrator or evaluator, because it will help you decide if you need to put energy into leadership development, right? And I mean existing leadership, helping them understand the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why they need to be strong proponents of it. All right. The next one is equity, right? So you can look at the equity stuff through a similar lens, right? And so, hey, ask me this question around what's the process for, is the process for career advancement well known and transparent and understood by all, right? And that's about equity, right? Do we all have equal access to those opportunities? And then another one might be, tell me how you feel about people from all backgrounds being able to have equitable opportunities within the organization. Just another really good question to help you understand how people are experiencing the world, right? And so when we talk about these kind of qualitative indicators, where you're getting into how people feel, and their opinions, these are really, really good because, again, it's almost as good as an open-ended question for some of these. And then you can start to use these as your baseline, right? As you go over time, you're obviously going to start to gain, and you can start to track and see where you've made improvements in programs to these metrics. The next one here is really about inclusion. And so, it's just around questions. Do you feel respected by your peers? Do you feel like your unique background and your identities, the identities that you bring to work, are valued? And can you bring those values to work? Do you feel safe bringing them to work? And then there's always a good one about social interactions in my mind. And I think you can phrase it in different ways. For a while, I used to work in tech, and I used to work with a lot of startups. And, they always had the Friday afternoon happy hours or something. But if for religious or personal reasons you weren't a drinker, those social interactions really weren't for you. And they actually excluded people because it was kind of more of a alcohol-fueled party, I guess, for some of them. And so I think that asking questions about social interactions are really valuable so that you understand what behaviors and what things you're doing that you think might be kind of team building exercises or activities that maybe in reality are not perceived that way by all. And then there is another bucket. I think you can call it whatever you want. I'm calling it other here on this diagram. But you could start to ask specific questions around discrimination or harassment here. You could also start to ask some other questions that just are maybe unique to your situation or your organization. And the last one there, I feel comfortable talking about issues of racism with my team. I think it's important. Many of us started this thinking about this too late, but it would have been great to have this kind of baseline assessment, from 2019, measured it after George Floyd, and now measured it a year later, because I do sense that there has been significant improvement in most organizations around this, right? There's a lot more people who are comfortable talking about racism, and there are now even forums and avenues for people to have those discussions within organizations or within teams. So another really, really important thing there. The last one I'll leave, and I think I said this before though, is make sure you include those open-ended questions, because I think you're going to realize that you get some really, really valuable nuggets of insight there, okay? And again, don't forget to look at this kind of across the indicators, right? And so, you got some qualitative things in there. You also want to make sure that you have quantitative as well. And you're going to get some of that from your diversity dimensions that I mentioned earlier, right? So race and age and sexual orientation. And so now you can start to take these questions or these themes and then slice and dice them by, hey, did we increase the number of women of color, within the organization? Or what was the opinion or sense for women of color to X question? Really, really is going to help you figure out where you need to then focus your programs, okay? And so when I talk about that, when I say focus your programs, I'm talking really about training and education and even goals, right? And so how do we align our training and education here to address the gaps. And also you want to think about professional development and how do I make sure that my team is incented to achieve these goals. Okay. So now I want to do like maybe a quick little breakout for, I don't know, 10-ish minutes. And I think we'll break up into groups of 4 or 5 people. And what I really would love for you to do is to have a conversation and plan on coming back and either kind of doing a quick little report out from your group or dropping it in the chat. We'll see how we do on time. But to discuss what DEI areas are most important to international development and or your organization as you go forward. And I guess I say this because I've had a few conversations with various companies in this space, and this seems to have always come up. And so I think about gender, race, age, ability when I start thinking about planning for the future. And, you know, what does your future workforce need to look like? What does workforce engagement need to look like? Because we know that workforce engagement, employee engagement, is directly tied to profitability. So the more engaged my employees are, the more profitable I am as an organization, right? And so what are those things like that? I also would encourage you to think about, you know, development and growth goals. Think about the representation as well when you have this here. There's many people have talked about, oh, we want to increase the number of Latinos, you know, within our organization. Well, let's think about those areas and especially which ones are going to help you, not just internally in the US if your operations are here, but also internationally. So I'm going to pause there and see if we can get our breakouts going. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so we'll take 10 minutes and then we'll come back and do a quick little report out and then hopefully wrap up and have time for questions. So I want to kind of make sure we leave a couple minutes for questions here. So I'm going to kind of move through this with a little bit of pace. And so coming out of that discussion, at least the one I sat in was really, really powerful. So if you can, I'd love for people to drop in the comments, just a few thoughts around their conversation and what some of those challenges that they identified are. But for me, really fascinating to start thinking about this. You know, one thing that came up was that this isn't an HR task. And I guess I don't think I said that, but this isn't this DEI stuff. I mean, HR may be involved, but boy, you know, as individuals and as team leaders, we can do this work ourselves too. So I want to encourage you to think about that. And if it doesn't mess with the politics of your organization, you can do this work, right? You can go out and do this little survey with your team. And so one of the pieces is once you kind of do that initial survey, you can take those initial survey results and then use those to inform the goals and strategies that you're building against. So if you have a goal of increasing, you know, recruitment of X group, then you can really take your survey results, figure out where you have challenges with that recruiting and retention, and then start to develop programs and solutions to address them. I'm also going to say that, you know, defining the indicators is just a really important piece too, right? This is just like the way you're going to measure your progress. It's think about it as like as a roadmap or a road sign. You know, hey, am I on the right road? How far have I gone? How much further do I have to go? Right. And then I also have this kind of this lasting or permanent record of our journey as well. And so really important as you start to build programs and do more of this work that you kind of have these indicators that you're using to measure, and then that you're able to track and see the progress over time. And then the last one is, what do you do with the results? Before you start doing the survey, start thinking about what you're going to do with the results. You know, I think I was in a group with someone who said that, you know, they started this work a year ago. They were super enthused about it, but it's taken a year to get kind of a report out. And so that's why I think it's important to think ahead of time what you're going to do with the data. Who's going to analyze the data? Who's going to do the write-up? What are the, you know, potential focus areas or the distribution for these results as well? Think about those so that you don't have these long delays between asking people for their input and then coming back to them. I think people, you know, probably in the professional work you all do, that's kind of a no-brainer, but I'm going to throw it out there. And so here, just real quick, you know, you can see if you run a survey, and this is just a total mock-up, But this is where you can start to realize differences, right? And so you ask this question about, are there role models I can relate to? And then you disaggregate the data, by race, and you may start to see things like this. This is basically a real survey that a client ran earlier, well, I guess last year, right? But there are big gaps. And so you can start to take the results and figure out what that means and then develop your programs from there. So kind of starting to wrap up, make sure you report your impact. It's a shame to do all this work and not tell the story. And I say do this for a few reasons. One is that we manage what we measure. So if you want people to start managing DEI, then you've got to start doing these measurements, right? I said this before, disaggregate your data, right, for deeper insights, and then connect the disconnect. And what that means is that there's always seems to be this disconnect between DEI and team performance and team results. And what I'm suggesting is that we start to tie those together, that we start to make them components of people's performance goals, right? Our team goals. And then we're driving that goal accountability that way. And I think it's one thing to talk, just like I said in the beginning of this, like, we pledged $50 billion, but we've only spent $250 million. This is where we need to start talking about accountability. I know you said you were going to do this, but what actually happened? And that's where kind of the evaluation work can really help you with that, because it gives you that baseline as well as a way to see how many programs did I run and what was the impact. So with that said, I think I'm done. Julie, let's go ahead and open it up and see if we have any questions.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, we did have some comments that had come in early in the conversation that I will mention. So from Carrie earlier on, she had said, the American Evaluation Association has developed some good resources on cultural competency in evaluation. And so she was talking about how might DEI practice pull from these competencies in our own context. I do know that you had mentioned, John, some possible resources and examples of surveys. I know some people would like that. Maybe we can either share that on the platform, on the conference platform, or that's probably the best way, and put a link there of some resources. One person said, a lot of DEI conversations can be US-centric, even in international development. It is challenging, oddly enough, to expand inclusion without making it less meaningful. So some aspect of localizing the conversation and the action could be helpful. So I don't know if you have any comments related to that.
Not besides, I fully agree. I guess in my breakout, we touched on this a little bit, right? Which was the need or consideration to survey, your external partners, right? Or the employees that are working in a host country. Because I think it's important to understand that context. But I think also, if you are doing international work and you have the budget, it's really valuable to find a local expert to support your efforts, just because they understand the nuances and they're going to save you from making mistakes along that journey. So there's enough resources out there internationally, I think, that you can usually find that support. And I say, if you can find local resources that understand the culture and the context.
Great. And so there is one last comment, which I agree with, from Tosca. She was talking about how the importance of external transparency in terms, not just internal on results, just to add to the sense of urgency. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really great idea. I think, me as a Black man, when I go to do my research, that's what I'm looking for. If someone calls me up to come talk to them or speak or work with them, or even if it's someone I'm considering, investing in, let's say a nonprofit, I'm going to look for that data. I'm going to say, are you reporting that data? Is that something you care about? Because it's something that I care about. We said this in my little breakout, is that, younger millennials kind of and on down, that's what they care about. They're focused on DEI, right? And are you supporting me in the things that I value? And if not, it goes back to the challenge people are going to have with recruiting and retention. because now I think we've all just been forced where we have to show the world that we're doing the work. So the idea that, yes, we need to expose our data externally, I fully agree with. And even if you're not doing well, especially tech space where they haven't been sharing data, I think it's hurting them. And I think if you look at tech, hiring, they're really being challenged now because they're not doing the work. And so I say, share the data, do the work, and let people know you're doing the work. And I think your recruiting will follow.
Excellent. So on that note, John, we just have a few more minutes. I don't know if you have any final comments before I just close out.
My final comments are just to encourage people to do the work and not burn themselves out. So figure out what you can do and what makes sense for you in this space, and then just do your little bit, right? Add to the whole, but do your little bit. Don't try to take on more than you can realistically do. It's a journey, and we all kind of need to make sure we maintain our momentum and strength for that. So I'll leave you with those words, and just a big thank you to Julie and to Bobby for this session. I appreciate this work and especially the work that this group is doing.
Thank you, John. That's great advice in all aspects, even beyond DEI, taking it slow. So I just want to make, so thank you to John and everyone that joined us today. I'm putting 3 closing piece of information. First, don't forget to give us feedback on the conference. We're always trying to improve this in the future. And we will be sending that out tomorrow afternoon, as well through email after the conference. Join us online in terms of the social media conversation, and that's at #SID-W conference. And then finally at 2:00, we invite you to come back onto the platform and join us for a DEI plenary session on the myth of the urgency of now. So let's continue the conversation there. And thank you again, John. Round of applause to you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon. And we'll see you at 2:00.
Thanks.
Bye.